Who are we? Okay.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Inside Movies Galore. I'm your host for the evening, and here in the room we have the Inside Movies Galore crew. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
How is
Hello.
everyone doing? Did everyone get through the slog of film that we watched?
It's not a slog at all.
Oh, no. For a silent film, that's actually quite good.
What do you mean for a silent film? Silent films are fantastic.
Well, in any case, since Septim brought us this film to the table, why don't you tell us a little bit about the film and what you thought about it the first time that you saw it? I'm assuming that this was not your first time.
Oh no, actually, my watching this came about as either one of two things that it hit me. One is I wanted to actually have some variety in my collection because all I had was like a certain type of film. And I really wanted to get some classics. I wanted to make my collection a collection and things of worth. But also, I was in a way competing with my friend who also was collecting. So trying to see who had the series with the most episodes or who had the.
So you're trying to run your friend into the ground, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Make him suffer.
Collective competitism.
Yes, but at the same time, I was extremely curious about this because the film was one of the. I think it was, if not the film, it was one of the first feature-length movies, like ever, which to me is quite an amazing feat. And then once I got to actually see it, to me, I was very impressed by just the effects that came with it. I had gotten more of a fascination after watching, what was that film that was related to Mie, or what was it that won the Oscar?
Georges Méliès, and you're thinking of Hugo.
Yes, thank you. With basically, Hugo had renewed my interest in older film and what they could do and what they actually did to bring this, because they didn't have those computers. They didn't have the ability to do a lot of the special effects. And I was blown away by just what they did, the tricks they used, the things that they were able to do to bring Dante's Inferno to life on the screen. So to me, I was just generally impressed the entire time I watched it the first time. This other time I watched it, I'll admit, the Tangerine Dream background to it kind of left me a little bit sleepy. But that same effect happened with Nosferatu. A different soundtrack did a different feature, or did differently for me when I watched the other.
Okay. Why don't we go over to Katie? Katie, what was this your first time seeing the film?
This was my first time seeing it. I actually hadn't even heard of it, I guess. Well, maybe. If we called it Dante's Inferno, I guess I would have heard of it. But it was a tough watch for me. I think generally, like, silent movies aren't really my thing. Like, a lot of reading. I don't mind, like, subtitle reading, but especially a movie like this, the way it's worded, it's from 100 years ago, and then also probably the wording that they're using was probably from, a couple more 100 years before that. And so, like, it kind of takes me a minute to understand what I'm reading when I'm reading something, like, worded so old. And I don't know, just
like you're reading Middle English.
Yes, yeah,
Well,
like reading Shakespeare too. Like, doesn't.
Well, that's not correct because Shakespeare is written in modern English. Now they've retroactively called it early modern English, but it's the exact
whatever it
same.
is, it doesn't read the way I understand.
But it is the exact same form of English that we speak today, as opposed to, say, Old English and Middle English, which those do not sound even remotely like a language that you and I could understand today. This one was clear. Well, I mean, originally the or the Divine Comedy was in Italian, but then it obviously got translated into what sounds like Elizabethan era English, so early modern English. But I, being the big Shakespeare fan, I kind of understood it immediately. But that's just me.
Yeah, this isn't my cup of tea, like in general. So, and couple that with my ADHD and my my attention being pulled in 800 different directions, and the Tangerine Dream soundtrack was killing me. So I actually muted it and turned on my own music and like watched it listening to my own music, which made it a little bit more tolerable. But overall, like my first time through trying to watch it, I fell asleep. Yeah, and it just, I don't know, it didn't catch me, and I tried to appreciate it for being what it is, the one of the first feature-length movies ever, and tried to. I don't know a lot about filmmaking, so as far as how they did some of the things, I would be interested in knowing that information, like how they got some of the things. I imagine like laying film over film or something like that. I don't know. I don't know how the tricks work, but for 1911, like there was some pretty neat, effects that they did. But yeah, overall, it was a snooze fest for me.
Okay. Did you catch any of the demons and the serpent that supposedly was supposed to have the?
Oh yeah.
What did you
I did catch a couple. I mean, like I said, for the time, like it seems pretty cool. Like I don't know what all went into doing all that stuff, and I don't know anything about what was available for filmmaking back in those times and what they had to go through. But I imagine it was a lot of work and probably took a long time to get it to come to what they eventually the finished product was.
Believe it or not, it took about 3 years.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I believe that.
From what I understand, and this is supposedly the first Italian feature-length film, from what I understand. And there was a woman that apparently was by the name of Nancy Mitford. He'd seen it in 1922 and referred to it as Dante. And evidently, he records the scene that it lasted from 9 till about 12:15 at night, including 2 intermissions.
Oh, I would have been napping.
That's a
hard
feature length.
all that time.
So why don't we go over to Red Raven? Red Raven, what did you think of the film? Was this your first time watching?
This was my first time, and I didn't really care for it, especially because of the music. Whatever that was playing on the YouTube version, I just did not care for at all. I mean, I almost rather mute it and watch it silent because the music was just so bad.
I don't know which versions you guys are watching, because the one I watched had a great soundtrack.
Well, we watched a version that has the music of
Tangerine Dream.
Tangerine Dream in it. And
Yeah, that wasn't the one I watched. I watched one that was from 2016, and it was a live score that was performed, and it had a kind of Mike Oldfield kind of feel to it, and it sounded it sounded incredible. But yeah, that's the one I watched.
Okay. Kabuki Jake, was this a first time watch for you, or what was rewatch for you?
This was the first time I've seen it. It definitely is the oldest film I've seen at this point, or at least the oldest feature, but I think the oldest film. And I don't know, I admit the soundtrack kind of didn't help keep me alert, but I liked it. I didn't dislike it. It didn't help keep me awake. I did close my eyes a couple times during the course of it. For the most part, though, I watched it through, and yeah, I'm very impressed by the level of effects they were able to make happen at the time. I'm disappointed at the grainy quality, but you expect that with a film with that old.
Those
Hmm?
those who know about the Comedy beforehand with the levels of hell,
Mhm.
and you being a librarian, you're a librarian, correct?
Are you talking to me?
Yeah.
Why? I work in a library. Yes, I was an English major, so I did have to read the Inferno. And,
Do you know whether this film depicted the levels of hell that Dante Inferno?
um, to be honest, I have not read Inferno in probably close to 10, wow, 15 plus years, and I didn't much like it then.
Okay.
But from what I remember, I think it's a pretty decent depiction. Um, I remember the certain parts better than others, and they did quote, at least translations of the poem as they went along at various points. And certainly what they showed on screen definitely seemed to fit, the parts that were quoted. Um, but I wouldn't claim to be familiar enough to say how close it was.
Yeah, I was an English major too in college, and by the time I was in there, I mean, we depending on which class it was, generally speaking, we stuck to authors whose native language was English. It depended because, like, again, depending on which era, or if you're talking about high school or whatever, I read a lot of stuff that was translated from another language, or was from, like, I read a translation of Beowulf that was it was translated from Old English into Modern English. So it just depends on which class, but I do know that I read, I don't know if I read the whole thing, but I read plenty of Paradise Lost, which the Divine Comedy inspired. It helped to pave the way for that.
Paradise Lost. That was an interesting read.
Mm-hmm. But that one, the native language is English, so that
Well,
the rhyme scheme works, in a way that it's not going to work for something that's originally written in Italian and then translated in English.
I read the Divine Comedy in the Oxford version of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, and it was in English canto form, so it was like 3 lines each, and I remember bits and pieces from each, and the Inferno was the first story, Le Paradiso was the second, and or actually it was Limbo first, and then Paradise after Hell. And from what I remember, this depicted this almost pretty precisely. I mean, I wouldn't mind if they did a modernization of the Inferno story.
They've done. Yeah. I mean, there was an animated version called Dante's Inferno based on the game Dante's Inferno, but that probably takes a lot of liberties. Then there was As Above, So Below, which took a lot of inspiration not only from like occult, well, not specifically alchemy, and like some early esotericism or early occultism, but also from the Divine Comedy. So you see, like, the people whose feet are stuck out of the ceiling or the walls or something, that they do that in that movie, and just little bits and pieces like that.
Oh, As Above, So Below was an excellent film, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I loved it. I don't know why the critics seem to hate it. I think it's just because they and audiences tend to not get found footage movies, I don't think.
Now, I admit the cartoon, though, yeah, a lot of liberties there. It'd be like as if the main character was a badass who would go around and beat the crap out of everybody.
Exactly. But yeah, if they were to do that nowadays, modern audiences wouldn't get it, because they're just not used to thinking of not only the way that those kinds of stories are told, but they're not really used to thinking about those kinds of ideas.
Well, from what I understand, Dante Alighieri met a girl at the age of 9 by the name of Beatrice. And it was because of this little girl that he inspired to immortalize her in the Inferno as being this, spirit that kind of helped get him guidance through the passageways of hell.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then John Milton, got his daughters to help him finish, his writings towards the end of his life, and it was J.M. Barrie was inspired by the children of I forget which hospital that was, for Peter Pan. It's like the children have, and Hans Christian Andersen too. It's like children have influenced a lot of great pieces of literature over the years.
Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, Virgil was a poet that apparently was, at least to Dante, a poet of that he looked up to.
Mm-hmm.
So,
just for context, I don't know if anyone was confused by this, but just for context, so anybody from from the later Middle Ages and especially during the Renaissance and especially in like Elizabethan England and that kind of stuff, anybody who had a formal education or like in Shakespeare's case was just naturally gifted, they all were able to access and went back to the writings and works of the great Greek philosophers and mathematicians and just people that had written down their ideas for a long time ago, and they were inspired by Greek mythology and that sort of thing. So what you find with this is that you find a lot of Christian ideas of hell mixed with Greek mythological aspects of the underworld. So you have like a river, and you have these different layers, and you have they have Cerberus in there, and
Cerberus.
So
Cerberus to me kind of looked like a 3-headed llama.
I know certain people in the next room who wouldn't mind a 3-headed llama, but yeah. So I think that's interesting, and I imagine a lot of modern audiences would be confused by that. But if you read any Shakespeare play or see it performed, or other writers from that period, they tend to really love the Greeks, and it influenced their writings.
Jason and the Argonauts. I believe there was a rendition of Cerberus, and if you know that.
You mean the movie, or?
Yeah, in Jason and the Argonauts, the movie.
Well, I thought that was the Hydra that he fights.
There is a dog. Oh wait, no. This was in one of Ray Harryhausen's productions.
Yeah, are you thinking of like Clash of the Titans or something?
There, yes, Clash of the Titans. There we go. In the original Clash of the Titans, there was a.
Yeah, I was gonna say Cerberus was not in Jason the Argonauts, and if he was, I would have remembered. Believe me, because I loved that movie when I was a kid, and I still love it today.
I was still thinking Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah, your brain was in the right ballpark, at least.
But Septum, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think about the levels of hell that are depicted here?
I actually always was fascinated by it. When I read the trilogy many many years ago.
Many years ago when I was 23.
Actually, when I was younger than that. I always found that the most fascinating part of the trilogy. And I'll admit, the trilogy for the most part kept putting me to sleep. But there's something about old writings where there's a lot of
Philosophizing.
Yes, exactly. That word. And it's almost like when I would read St. Augustine's writings. It just there was that sort of repetition to it. But I loved the concepts, almost like a painting by Bosch, I believe, the early medieval painting.
Hieronymus Bosch.
Where they had those depictions of hell, and it brings something to the imagination, and to me that brings an excellent fascination with with theology, and with just what people imagine this is to be.
Well, that's why it's so important to people in general, and especially if you are an English major like I was, regardless of whatever your particular religious beliefs are or are not, you have to know the mythological or religious theological framework of the works that you're studying, so you understand them. Because especially in the Christian world, those ideas and the stories and the writings have all inspired some of the most beautiful works of art ever. And or in Hieronymus Bosch, they very, very fascinating stuff. Like he's one of my favorite painters because he's so interesting and so nightmarish and beautifully grotesque in places. And Caravaggio, of course, with chiaroscuro technique. And I don't know, I could go on and on about that, but you have to know the context in which these things arise, because otherwise a lot of the significance of this stuff is lost.
Yes, definitely.
What's interesting is that this particular film depicted some of the engravings of Giuseppe Dore, who actually illustrated a lot of depictions of hell, which I believe is where Dante Alighieri got many of his, imaginings of hell for, his Divine Comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that some of the sound for this film was published in 2011 by the Edison Studio, which is kind of unique because the Edison Studio has been around for quite a long time.
Well, and let's not forget that Edison Studio was responsible for the very first screen depiction of Frankenstein's monster in Frankenstein from 1910, which is 1 year before this. Now, that one I think was only 10 minutes, but it was
short film.
Yeah, it was. I mean, because again, feature films back in those days, those were not common. I mean, short films, what we would now call short films, those were the hot new thing. And the idea of a feature was still kind of a monumentally ambitious thing. But
that's what makes this, in my opinion, so special. Is that, like I say, I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the first, and that is a brave step to take.
Mm-hmm.
What I found interesting about this film is that when they were in one of the circles of hell, which is I think part of the part of their beyond the gates of the the Circle of Dis.
Mhm.
I believe that there was a moment where it said on the screen that that they had someone protect them from the demons. So that made me think that the divine power that was supposedly protecting them wasn't protecting them at that point in time.
Well, keep in mind that a train arrives at the station was in the early 1900s, and people literally thought that the train was coming out of the screen at them. They jumped out of the way. So keep in mind that in the early days of film, they were still seen as kind of a novelty and as this thing that is powerful, clearly, that they don't quite understand. And they would show just little sideshow attractions, really, and hadn't really thought about the narrative possibilities of film until a few years later, like we saw. But that, in other words, you can't really be too hard on people trying to understand this literally life-changing medium, this world-changing medium.
The other thing that I was thinking is, how large is the river Styx?
In Greek mythology?
Well, because you see this Santa Claus in diapers bring them across the river Styx the first time, and that.
How dare you make fun of my grandfather?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to talk about that evil soul. Okay, but it seems like they crossed the river Styx several times in several different circles of hell. That is why I was thinking, like, how large is the river Styx? Because they cross it once, and then apparently they have to cross it once again. It's like,
well, keep in mind that they're dealing with
in these levels of hell.
Keep in mind that they're dealing with a human three-dimensional a way to try and condense down these very non-physical spiritual concepts. So, like, in the realm of the spiritual, there are no physical bodies, and all this is very metaphorical anyway. So it's just like, well, anything that anyone does in a film or even in a piece of writing is just to try and condense down the indescribable.
I think the most comical scene in this film, if you could take one from this, level of darkness, is the scene where you see the misers rolling the big bag of gold around their circle. Katie, what?
Yes.
Did you notice that those big bags of gold?
I can't say that I did. That was probably one of the parts where I was sleeping.
Are you trying to imply that she's a gold digger?
Hardly.
No. But evidently, there were all these like dudes in diapers rolling supposedly big bags of gold around in circles. So it was definitely
fluffy bags of gold.
big bales of hay.
How did you know my secret?
I did notice the three-headed llama, though.
Yeah.
I did see that part.
Somebody needs to go back and watch the movie with. That was the one that I watched that had the great score.
My favorite part cinematically was when all of a sudden you saw. I think it was it Beatrice that just kind of flitted out of the screen, and then Virgil just kind of disappeared from the screen.
I remember seeing the disappearing people and thought that was neat and wondered if anybody knew how they did that.
That was definitely unique. Oh, and the part where the giant grabbed Virgil and Dante, and brought him into that next circle of hell. Was that Andronicus or yeah, he was.
Where's
I
our
thought that was
expertise filmmakers that can tell us how these special effects were done? That's what I'm curious about.
I want a Criterion release of this film.
I wish, yeah. Well, a lot of this stuff is to get into that. I mean, obviously that's what I like the most about it, but and because I just love silent films in general. But the particularly that part that you're talking about, I think that looked like forced perspective to me, to make him appear giant, and then it looked like either. What would that have been? It wasn't rear screen projection. It was, and didn't they? I forget when like the conventional forms of matting were put into place, but there were earlier methods of overlaying shots in such a way that you take a piece of one and a piece of the other and then rephotograph them together.
Well, I know in order to get them to fly. Like they did. I know that they had to have some kind of suspension cords, holding them as they flew over. So they had to have some kind of a pulley system for when they wanted to pull someone up or pull someone to the side or this and that. So I'm assuming that there was some kind of suspension.
Well, there was for one of the monsters you saw. You could actually see the string. Which again, like people love to make fun of that now, but that was also 1911. So I mean, keep that in mind. That a lot of the gaff watchers were not. That was not an audience that was around yet, or like there were no communities of waiting to hate on the new Star Wars movie just because it exists for no reason whatsoever.
Actually. Speaking of the string, I was going to ask y'all this. Did anybody notice when they had the dog, not the llama, but the actual dog on the screen? I swear I saw the dog had been tied with a string, like a leash. Did anybody else see that? Because I swear I saw that as I was going in, but I couldn't quite tell correctly.
I'll have to rewatch it, watch it because you probably watched it several times to notice it.
Well, the second time I watched it, I actually had a death metal soundtrack that I put on.
Nice. Put on some Slayer or something.
Well, actually, I discovered. And again, I'm not knocking Tangerine Dream. I actually think that the soundtrack is excellent, but not for a movie that I want to make sure I'm alert for the whole way through. Because Tangerine Dream did the version of Nosferatu I have. And I like Nosferatu a lot, but I was falling asleep while watching it with Tangerine Dream in the background.
Well, they're very mellow. I mean, it's a little bit like kind of similarly, but a little bit different was the Giorgio Moroder version of Metropolis, which has a lot of 80s pop and with lyrics and stuff. And it's
would it do much better with monks chanting?
Actually, that would make it creepy as heck.
I was gonna say, like, I know plenty of people that could make a really creepy, score for this. And again, the one that I watched, I can link it to you if you want. But the one I watched had a great kind of avant-garde score that really worked. It kept me, engaged in it, and it fit the visuals really well.
I was just listening to other horror soundtrack songs on a shuffle that worked okay.
Yeah, but you're all right though that the choice of the right score in any film, but especially silent films, that's key. And I generally I like when I can hear it as close to what the original score would have been as I can. The only problem is that the older the film gets, the more likely that the original score has been lost. And so that's why, you see a lot of people take their stabs at it, or like you'll see like a kind of generic classical music score put in there, because they can.
You should see if your friend and composer could put some music to this.
Oh, I know he could. I mean, if he wanted, I could probably talk him into scoring like a whole bunch of silent films, so that way he could, put those albums on iTunes or something, because there's nothing stopping him, or like selling a DVD of it or something. But
Yeah.
I mean, why not? I mean, because the person I'm thinking of could do it really, really well. Just would depend on if he had a passion for it, because and I think, of course, I'm the big silent movie guy, so I'm like, yes, please do it. Anything silent movie, do it. But well, I mean, why not? It's public domain, nothing's stopping you. But you're all right that the right choice of score can work for it, or it can work against it. Because like, I'm a big fan of Metropolis, and I got to see the complete when they discovered the new footage, or the previously unseen footage. I saw the complete Metropolis on the big screen. Now, granted, the restored footage was barely usable. Like, it was really scratched and stuff, but it was there. It was about the best shape it's ever going to be in. But like, I saw it on the big screen, and I saw it with. I think that they reconstructed the score either completely or as close as they could or something. But I was like, I was really blown away by the ability to restore it in such a reverent way. And then I saw Giorgio Moroder's one, which came out earlier in the 80s, in 1984, and definitely an interesting attempt to try to get people to see a movie that they wouldn't otherwise see. But it kind of felt like its own thing, because it was also an hour and a half as opposed to like 2 hours 40 minutes or something like the original is. So a lot of the story's lost, and it just kind of feels weird because it's got this modern music, and it feels like a big music video rather than like an actual film. But you are right. It's like you got to pick the right music to make it work emotionally.
What I found interesting is that three directors had actually worked on this by the names of Francesco Bertolini, Adolfo Padavon, and Giuseppe de Liguoro. I thought it was interesting that three guys worked on this.
Well, it's depend. Well, Gone with the Wind was George Cukor. Then he got fired, and then Victor Fleming came in, and for a time, he walked off the set, and then they got a third guy who they kept on to do like some what would now be second unit stuff. I mean, Victor Fleming did return, and he got the official credit for it. But that was a monumental film to make, and that took 3 people down with it pretty much. But yeah, it just depends on the more ambitious you get, the heavier lies the crown.
When I was doing some reading before I got on the podcast, I was reading about a depiction of Muhammad in the hell sequence, and it painted him as this unflattering character. And it makes this film one of the few films to depict him in such a way.
Even South Park didn't do that. I mean, they just were portraying Muhammad at first in Super Best Friends in kind of a silly but very not offensive way. And then in subsequent portrayals, they don't even show him, but they just are dancing around it. Because that's kind of where things have gotten now, is just the idea of even showing Muhammad in any form, is a life-threatening thing. And then, you think about just the state of affairs back in 1911.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some of the scenes from Hell were also used in 2 other films. One from 1936 called Television, which was an exploitation film, and then in 1944 there was a race film called Go Down Death, which apparently some of the scenes were used, but the American State Film Censor Boards required removal of the hell sequences from Go Down Death, where a woman's bare breast is momentarily seen.
Yeah.
Which, it's funny, American censorship has not been terribly, has had very little rhyme or reason, and it's always been within the motion picture industry, as opposed to like what it is in England, where they have the film classification board, and most kind of parliamentary governments, they have a film censorship board in as part of the government. Um, but in America, everything is the industry kind of regulates itself, and it's done in a much more kind of capitalistic way. So, in other words, the studios will say, you know, we are shooting for this rating. The Motion Picture Association of America says, you know, whatever they're going to say at first. And then if they don't get it, then they give them a breakdown of, you know, okay, you need to do this and this to make it hit this rating and all that stuff. But that's all internal. So, and now granted, then local governments have banned certain films because of the rules of their local obscenity rules and things like that, which are not necessary. Well, they're not necessarily national ones, but it's just interesting how it's very wishy-washy here. And America is always kind of regarded as being like this very puritanical kind of prudish place. In certain ways, it is that way, but in other ways, we're more permissive than, say, you know, England, which censors a lot of stuff, or like New Zealand, or all kinds of places.
Well, it's about at what time a film gets released really depends on what's going to fly in a culture. Like Browning's Freaks was not well received for a long time. But then again, I mean, in 1915, Birth of a Nation was lauded as a great and grand film. But
also at the same time, that was the first time anybody had ever seen anything on that scale. You know, so it was the big epic before we even used that term. You know, so.
Now, would Birth of a Nation be successful today? That's the question. Now, there's a maybe. There might be an audience today that would love that.
But believe it or not,
still,
this film...
A lot of the people that would love that film today are running for Congress in your district.
But believe it or not, this film, at the time that it was made, was the blockbuster of its time.
Yes.
From what I understand.
2 million, I believe.
But also, have you ever heard of a book called Hollywood Babylon?
Yes, I have.
Okay, that was written by a man by the name of Kenneth Anger, which he's known in film to have done a short film called Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, and it utilizes some of the footage from this film.
Well, he was an experimental filmmaker and influenced a lot of people like Scorsese, and you know, anybody who kind of wants to push the visual boundaries.
Well, he also tended to use gay influence on his films as well. So, in any case, did anyone else have anything else to add? I was gonna ask if Jake, did you have anything else to add?
On this one, honestly, not a whole lot. I didn't really have a whole lot to say on this one. I'm glad I finally saw it. Well, it is an important one. I try to see it definitely is considered the first, and that's always a big thing. And I was impressed by the skill level involved for the time that the film came out. But yeah, I didn't have much more beyond that, honestly.
Okay.
This was like one of the first silent films I've seen, and I haven't seen very many foreign films either. And so I like the concept of reading something and then seeing it afterwards, that's pretty neat. Whereas in foreign films, you're reading it as it's happening.
Well, I can point you to all kinds of great silent films and all kinds of great foreign films, some of which will overlap with each other. But yeah, I mean,
because I guess it gives you time to focus on just the reading, and then you get to actually see what's going on versus trying to do both.
Well, I love. Well, and if you've ever seen The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, they took a lot of time with making their inner titles really pretty, and certain ones, like the original version of Ben-Hur from 1925, like they made their inner titles really beautiful, and depending on how far back you go, like Frankenstein from 1910, it has like the Edison Studios, logo in it, and but the inner titles to me can be their own form of art if you do them right, and I think that I don't know. I can go on and on about silent films, how much I love the medium. I mean, obviously, I made my own silent film, and in black and white, German expressionist, the whole 9 yards, because I love it that much.
Speaking of German expressionism, do you think, being that this is an Italian film, do you think that this has some expressionism in the film?
Well, certainly not German expressionism, because that's obviously very specific. Well, that's very specific to that time and place, and the look of it is very specific. This definitely looks Italian to me. Expressionism as an art form in all kinds of ways, not just film, but that this film does, I think, intersect with the larger umbrella of expressionism, but it does not at all look Germanic in any way. It looks very Italian to me, and that's a good thing, because I wouldn't expect that to be the case. Otherwise, German expressionism wouldn't be what it is. And even American silent films of that time, they don't look like that. Because it's very specific.
Okay. Alrighty. Did anyone else have anything else to add?
Well, very quickly, I'm glad that you brought up Hugo. Because that's one of my all-time favorite movies that everybody I know absolutely hates, and I'm very sad whenever they hate on it, because, and I've known like self-described film people who just hate it, and I'm just like, you don't understand or love the medium that you're working with, do you? Because Hugo's like the ultimate celebration of film as an art form, but sometime I think we should watch that, just because it is a great story and it is a great
make that next film.
I think we should, because it's one of my all-time favorites, and it has a lot of personal significance for me.
When did it come out?
2011.
Yeah, I love Hugo. It gave me an extra appreciation for older films and the work that went into it, because not only did the film give you just the general appreciation, but it gave you some insight into what they did, into the struggles they went through. It's just, to me, it was an excellent film and very underappreciated.
It's tragically, it was nominated for a ton of Oscars, but just the general public just didn't watch it, and I'm sad about that, because I couldn't get enough of it.
Yeah.
But if we could watch that, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, let's do that, and I mean, we can always come back to Rose Red, that we were going to possibly do another time. This way, it gives some of those who have not seen the film and maybe an appreciation for silent film.
It's a good entry film into into old films, as well as into just film in general, because I think it explains why, to me, it explains why fiction, specifically movies, but books and art, I think it explains why it's important, and also like what it means for individuals trying to find their way and trying to find their meaning in this life, and just the fact that artists are human beings, and just the power and the kind of redemptive qualities in art.
one more thing before we close out here. I was going to say something about the demons and their wings. Did anyone get a imagining that they kind of looked like the winged monkeys from the Wizard of Oz?
I saw that.
Well, no, the Wizard of Oz monkeys, they have feathers.
It looked like Stitch from Santa Claus, the Mexican Santa Claus movie.
What?
What?
That's another one that has to be checked on one of these days in the future. The creepiest Santa Claus movie.
Stitch the Mexican Santa Claus?
Yes.
Yeah.
What's it called?
Santa Claus.
I want to make a movie called Santa Claus from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah, it is the creepiest Santa Claus I've seen next to Krampus. Even though it's meant to be a children's movie, it's
well, that makes it even creepier, doesn't it?
International Sweatshop.
Yes.
All the little children of the world.
Jacob, didn't you have something to say about Hugo? I felt like you were cut off there. So.
Oh, I was just commenting that it was I liked it partly because it was such an atypical Scorsese film. And actually, I am sitting on a copy that needs to be watched, but I haven't watched it because I specifically want to pair it with The Wolf of Wall Street, because that would be such an inappropriate pairing. You know,
it really would be, because those are complete opposites. I mean,
but they're both.
That's why I loved Scorsese, that he took a big risk and did something so outside of his usual genre and style, and yet at the same time you kind of get the sense that, like, I remember people were saying, "Oh, it's so impersonal, it's so hollow, it's so not genuine, it's so artificial." Blah blah blah. Like the people I know said that. And then I look at him like, are you kidding? This is a very personal film, but just not in the way that they're used to, you know?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, if everyone is okay with doing Hugo for next week, then let's do it.
I really want to, because I'm going to try and get Jill on that one, because that's a movie I was wanting to show her anyway, because, like, Punch Drunk Love was up there as far as, like, one of those personal films that kind of says a lot about me and my life, and Hugo arguably is even higher on that list because I relate a lot to the main character. And that's not something I say often, because usually I don't relate to movie characters.
Alrighty. So I'm going to end this episode with going to you, Septum Sim. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes. My name is Brandon. I run a channel called Septum Sin versus the World. We actually have recently launched, me and my wife have launched another channel called That Nerdy Couple, which is just a channel about our love of each other and movies, and just in general, the things that make us special as just us in general.
Are you and I friends on Facebook? Because I don't know if we are, but if not, then look for me, because I want to check that out. Because my girlfriend and I were trying to get into, like, the whole, our lives kind of thing, and so that'd be a good model to follow.
And she's definitely better at this YouTuber than I am.
She better at that newfangled YouTuber thing than I am.
Definitely. But my channel is Septum Sin versus the World. We basically about the appreciation of physical media in most of its forms, be it books, movies, or music, or video games, though mostly movies. And we've had some good stuff. I still feel like we had our most epic one last week with the week before last, with our Rebel Gaming Club themed episode, with our new opener, which we have been now running on a regular basis. And this Thursday, I actually post another review of an anime series, which I've been kind of shying away from, but I'm trying to do reviews of lesser known series or movies to try and get stuff out there, whether I like them or not. In this case, not.
Cool. And Kabuki Jake, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, I'm good with Jake. I frequently guest on Septon versus the World. Still stumbling toward getting my own channel together. I filmed some footage a couple weeks ago, but I have to piece it together and finding time to do that. So, but and other than that, I obviously, in addition to talking about physical media, I am an avid, one might say, obsessive collector of it, and just enjoy opportunities to chat movies with fellow movie lovers. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And Red Raven, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
I'm Red Raven, and I'm from Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I put shows together and promote in the Milwaukee area, and I'm a Dead Girl on Deadger's Dark Coffin Classics.
Alrighty. And do you have anything planned coming up, or is that
Not as of right now, no.
okay? So, Katie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Sure, I'm Katie Cadaver from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I'm a body positive horror artist and alternative model. And you can find me on patreon.com/Katie Cadaver, at Third Eye Open on Instagram. That's 3RDEYE0PEN. I'm also the makeup artist for the horror punk band Ratbat Spider, and you can listen to them at ratbatspider.bandcamp.com. And I'm a Dead Girl also for Deadger's Dark Coffin Classics. And you can watch the show at vimeo.com/DDCC. I'm also a performer and producer for Grindhouse Tees Burlesque. And you can find us on Facebook at Grindhouse Tees. And I'm also going to be performing this Friday the 13th for the Milwaukee Paranormal Conference fundraiser. It's Friday the 13th Fest. Part 5, I believe, the 5th one, and the theme for this show is invasion. Yes, the theme for this show is invasion, so it's going to be kind of like otherworldly and alien based. And there's going to be some burlesque performances by myself and a couple other burlesquers, and then there's going to also be a couple of bands, the Roll Dolls and the Smoking Flowers, and that is at the River West Public House down in River West in Milwaukee. 815 East Locust. That's this Friday at 9 p.m. So come check us out.
Okay, cool. Dane, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am Dane Kyle, filmmaker based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, and I made my own silent film called Eternus, and it was very well received by Lloyd Kaufman of Trauma Entertainment, Peyton Reed, who directed the 2 Ant-Man movies and Bring It On, and then it was well received by Charles Kyoto of the Kyoto Brothers, and it was one of 3 films in my graduating class to be sent to Eva Marie Saint and her husband to view, and it's gotten into some festivals. I submitted it. Well, no, actually, no. Sorry, that was a different one. But it's gotten into a couple festivals, and now it's in rotation on the American Horrors Roku channel, which I'm very happy about. And you can connect with me on Facebook and just talk to me about whatever. But always looking to get new fans. I'm in the middle of starting shooting on a Harley Quinn fan film this Sunday.
Awesome. And my name is David Straggy. I'm your host for the evening, and as well as running Inside Movies Galore. I also blog at Movies Galore Milwaukee, which you can check out my last review on, I believe, an Argentinian film called When Your Flesh Screams, which before this discussion, you will actually find a video review of the film as well, because tend to like to see what I can say myself from time to time, and I'm also a producer of some of small reports. And there was a film called Wrestle Massacre that is coming out in August, and I'm really looking forward to seeing a screener of that soon. So, in any case, definitely check out this page, like and subscribe, and hopefully you've enjoyed listening to our ramblings on this film, even though some of us did not like the soundtrack, nor was it their cup of tea. In any case, everyone say good night.
Night.
Good
Night.
night.